Greetings and salutations, Ranting Engineer back, set up in my kitchen because the lighting's actually pretty decent in here during the day. Okay, carrying on from previous, we were talking about natural gas. I wanted to finish the thought there is once we get our entire country set up on natural gas, backed up by other things that, if you want to call them green, you can use that, but we have a natural gas system. The excess is what we can sell. So we've got like main lines that go past Huntingdon down in BC, and we have the opportunity to liquefy this and transport it all over the world because it is much better when it comes to ideas of coal. Again, if you've watched my video series, you know that coal can be cleaned up, but it takes extra energy to scrub things. Liquefied natural gas is just a way to transport natural gas. We can send it all over the place. However, we need the ability to do that. So we have to have these projects approved by the government. You still have to go to engineering. You still have to do the environmental stuff. But as I ranted before, we have all these regulations called environmental. You got to do a shit ton of work on the engineering side, environmental side, regulation side to get these things approved, period. I'll probably do a video on 69 and 48 bills separately. Anyways, I'll continue on. We could ship LNG all over the world. We need those facilities. I'll probably do that separately. So I'm going to get on to now is food. So we've talked about we need air, you have to have water, shelter, and heat. You have to have food or nourishment. Now this one gets tricky. The reason for that, I'm going to have to probably break it into 2 or 3 parts. So we don't have farms everywhere across Canada that naturally support the larger centers. Hence the reason why we import a lot of food. Now, could we, as Canada, be self-sustaining on food? I believe we can, but you won't get things like grapes. You won't get dragon fruits. You won't get tomatoes all year long, simply because the growing season here is actually quite short. We don't have a huge amount of greenhouses all over Canada. So certain places can grow much better than, like Southern Ontario is it's a great hub for food. I remember growing up in Fort St. John, you always look forward to like carrots and potatoes and everything, but that was late in the season, and quite often there wasn't always enough to get you through the winter. So this is tricky. So the growing areas aren't necessarily near the areas of where it's going to be used. And we import a lot, which is kind of to our convenience. I think the lemons sitting on my table right here are a product of South Africa. That's a long ways to come to Canada. That takes a lot of energy in the idea of diesel using to power a very large shipping vessel to get it here. We need to be self-sufficient. In order to be self-sufficient, we have to have a network of fuel. If you want to go electric trucks, we've got to have a network of electricity that supports that. So if you watch my video series, go back, it talks about all these pallets of brown. So dams, wind power, coal-fired, natural gas turbines, all this technology, we have to use it in the most efficient way to support the transport and the making of food. Now, the making of food on the most part is, a lot of it's going to be human-powered when you think about the orchards. It's going to be probably gasoline and diesel-powered vehicles on the most part. There is some electric in there, but when you see the push towards electricity, it just isn't there. Okay, not yet. Again, given the vast expanse of Canada, it doesn't make sense to have a lot of electric vehicles. The distance potential of a hydrocarbon liquid is just so high. Natural gas, CNGs, and everything, again, I've talked about before, all part of the palette. But when you think about it, the driving force behind Canada is gasoline and diesel. That is the backbone. You're not going to get away from that. Even though the Green Movement wants to push to that, it is not realistic. Not for given the population density and the vastness of Canada, when our major food centers are not near our major centers of population. Okay, so again, back to the idea of we want to be able to do this on our own, which means we're not going to get a lot of grapes. We're not going to get a lot of exotic foods. We're going to have the staples. So what we do is we need to have, we'll say, a national look at our fuel supply systems. And this ties into the video I did before about why are we importing oil from Saudi Arabia? Because we don't have the infrastructure to allow us to do that across Canada. There's kind of the dividing line. I don't want to pick on Manitoba. Shout out to Greg Burry, who's from there. But there is somewhat a line drawn across Canada energy-wise back and forth. So Western crudes, which tend to be heavier on the most part because they're bitumens, have to be upgraded before they can be sent to a refinery. Not all of them. There's some, again, conventionals I talked about in the past. But there's no real way to get those from the west to the east right now except through rail. Rail is not the lowest energy. Should be a supplemental way of moving hydrocarbons back and forth. We need pipelines. And not just a pipeline from the west to central Canada, where some of the refineries are. We need the linkage to move things back and forth, not only just crudes to be refined. So if you look at the maps across Canada, there's a bunch of refineries in Western Canada. There's one in Saskatchewan. I don't believe there's any in Manitoba. One of my buddies was saying most of that fuel comes out of the States. There could be. You could set up one there if you wanted to. There's a handful in Ontario. There's the ones I talked about that are in Montreal, Quebec City, Irving Oil out in New Brunswick, and Come By Chance over on the Rock. They're not connected. Now, the one on Come By Chance is very difficult, but it already produces Hibernia oils for the kind of the local area. That wouldn't be the last one I'd tie in, but you probably could if there's excess to use. However, if we have a network that we can move crudes, bitumens, SCO, we might have to go away from moving dilbits unless it's excess to overseas markets. But let's assume that we're doing all our internal stuff to make refined products to supply Canada. That's one aspect of it. So we need the pipelines going back and forth either direction. That's important. In my previous video, I talked about an outage for a refinery in Alberta, and the pumps are going dry in Lethbridge in under 2 weeks. That means we have an infrastructure problem when it comes to refined products also. We also do not have a national oil reserve whatsoever. There were some studies done years ago. I'm assuming it goes back to the days of Pierre Elliott Trudeau. I'm not sure. I've learned about this more recently. I believe my company is trying to get involved with looking at oil reserves. Well, if we have an infrastructure problem that we can't move unrefined and refined products back and forth through pipelines, which is, it's the most efficient way. Liberals, go take your head out of your ass. Rail, truck, okay? We can't really use it through the ocean because, again, we're limited. East-west is not connected properly. So if we're looking at a national plan for a strategic oil reserve, where do you put it? If we're using like all the salt caverns in Western Canada, I can't get that oil to Eastern Canada. Yeah, we could say as a typical Alberta, screw Eastern Canada. But we're looking at this, again, I'm taking all the politics now that I'm like, how do I put all these puzzle pieces together? I'm going, I need pipelines east and west to connect all these refiners' refined product. I need strategic areas to put proper oil, so probably SCO mediums that can be refined by any refinery in Canada. Or you have to put in cokers, or you have to put in deasphalting units. Basically, you've got to look at all the stuff across Canada and say, we need to make this not homogeneous, but technically capable of handling anything in Canada, which we don't have right now. The government is impeding this. Why? Because of the anti-pipelines. I'll do a separate, I've actually read the bills, so I'll take a separate video on this and talk about that. I'm trying to keep these in under 12 minutes. So anyways, back to this. To support food, we have to have fuel. We don't have a national fuel or a strategic reserve to support our food. You see the problem with this? So if I'm trying to get my oats from the field to make Cheerios to get to the table, so we're sustainable, I have to have the energy use in the field. I've got to have the energy to convert it to Cheerios, again, which is mostly electric. So here's where the pallet comes in. We go hydrocarbon to electricity, back to hydrocarbon for transport, which is probably some more hydrocarbon or electric from the store to our front door. Okay, not going to even talk about milk. Okay, we got to produce the milk, which takes a certain amount of machines or effort in the field. Then we got to transport it. Then we got to distribute it. You understand? Everything is on that backbone of energy. Typically hydrocarbon-powered vehicles, supplemented by electrical vehicles, supplemented by human. We should walk to the store more often to get the distribution of our food nationally. Again, if we took the time and we worked together, we could be self-sustaining in hydrocarbon across this country. We wouldn't need imports. We'd have enough to buffer through times like this. And by the way, that's a shitload of effort to put in those pipelines. We're going to keep people working. We're going to keep operators working. We're going to keep people working in refineries, in distribution. And most of all, we'll have that support for the farmers, which in this COVID-19 crisis, you should look and realize they are the most important people right now. Okay, next to frontline workers and everything, we don't get fed, we get dead. It's that simple. So that should put it in perspective. In fact, you know what? I'll back up. I've got friends who are farmers. If they called upon me and say, hey, listen, you got some extra time to come help on the farm, I would go do it. Al, Clarence, if you need help on the farm, just let me know. You know what? Everybody else should. It shouldn't be, I'm not going to pick on immigrant workers, but Canadians should step up and help their fellow farmers. The other thing is when you look at the national distribution, we grow here, we move here. We should have more growing in and around the metropolitan areas that require this. You see it in Vancouver. There's a lot of farms, say, out in the Delta, White Rock area, that help support, but that's not enough. That's why we import so much food. We're not sustainable. Part of it is, as people, we kind of like the convenience of, I like grapes, I like lemons, stuff like that, but we got to start with the Canadian staples first, okay? That's our mindset. So food, to get grown across Canada, requires energy to move, to process, to move again. That backbone right now is hydrocarbon, and we're not getting away from it. Period. We can't. It's not viable. All right? People aren't going to like to hear that. But when they accept that, and assuming we have this palette of shit brown, okay, I've got a backbone of hydrocarbon. I've got systems buffering in place to survive. We are using our own product. I wouldn't mind paying an extra 10 cents a liter built into the cost, not to go to CEOs of large companies, but to go into a tax base that allows other programs to thrive. Then we can look at supplemental energies like solar, wind, inline hydroelectric, knowing that they all have a carbon footprint, but we can lower it down that we're the most efficient we can for now. Now, stepping up to, like Tansy was saying the other day, what can we do as consumers to lower this? Okay, fuel efficient cars. I was joking with guys at work and he says, I can tell you how to get rid of a whole bunch of CO2 in this country. And they're like, what's that? Anybody that doesn't require it drives a 4-cylinder high efficiency car. Everybody's like, well, that sucks. I like my V8. V8s are fun. I grew up on them. But they're not necessary at all, except for industry. So guys in the field, they need them. They need the big trucks. Big trucks for hauling freight and everything. They need it. Big engines and trains are needed. I drive a little 4-cylinder car that's fairly fuel efficient on purpose. I carpooled for years. So my car actually sat idle for like 15, 16 years. These are some of the things you look at is, how are we expending fuel? Are we expending fuel in the most efficient way? Probably not. As consumers, you look at what is around that has energy associated with it. Okay, I've got a plastic bottle on my. Okay, we are surrounded by plastics. So that, from the standpoint, getting away from food a little bit. Well, thinking about food. Okay, you buy food from South Africa. That's high energy because it's come a long ways. Grapes. I love grapes, but even personally, I've started eating less of them, especially when they come from overseas in Mexico. There's a ton of energy that goes into it. So I'm down to trying to eat staples. It's pretty boring. I'm not perfect at it. Nobody is. I like my Texas barbecue also. Using a little bit of energy there if you want. Okay, but we got to be more realistic about it. We are shipping things worldwide as a global market, global economy that makes us less efficient because when that supply either ends, we don't have that food, or we haven't developed our system enough internally to support all the population we have, especially when you've got remote regions, you've got northern places, especially when steaks are like $55 for a steak way, way, way up north. That means we don't have an infrastructure to get it there properly. Anyways, I think that's a long enough rant for today. I'll load this up and we'll talk to you later. Have a good one. Bye.